Now, jumping into these two gentlemen here, we have with us today Tomer Gutman. He is a trust and estate litigation attorney, as well as Jason Schingler. He is an estate planning attorney. Both these gentlemen are with Warden Williams, and their website is wardenwilliams.com. That's the website, wardenwilliams.com. As you might have guessed by their titles, we're going to talk about estate planning, but more specifically, why it doesn't have to be complicated. We were kind of talking in the break here a little bit that sometimes additional complication is not necessarily a good thing. It can lead to frustration, expense, litigation, and we have these two guys on here, again, Tomer Gutman and Jason Schingler, to break it down for us and kind of give us some idea of how it can be simplified. Well, Jason, can you give us some basics on estate planning?
Sure. Why don't we talk about what clients come to us for in the first place? Why do people need an estate plan, sort of thing? There's three main reasons. The biggest one is probate avoidance, and we'll talk a little bit about what probate is in a moment. Incapacity planning. So if you lose your mental capacity, if you're in a car accident and you're in the hospital, you want somebody to be able to make decisions on your behalf, and so you need documents in place both for finances and for healthcare concerns that would allow someone to make these decisions on your behalf. And then the last one is tax planning. We used to do a lot of estate tax planning when I first started, and income tax planning is a big part of this as well. But estate tax planning isn't quite as big of a deal as it used to, and we can talk a little bit about why. The first one, probate avoidance. A lot of people have heard probate, and all they know about it is that they don't want to go through it. And so probate is essentially, it's a court-approved process to pass property from one person to another after you pass away. So if you die with either a will, or if you have no estate planning documents in place at all, you're going to have to open up this probate process. It's a long process, it's time-consuming, it's very expensive, and it's public. A lot of people don't know that, but if you open up a probate, you can go down and you can pull the file and you can find out who their heirs are, what assets they owned, a lot of information about them, and a lot of people just don't want to do this. And so it's fairly simple in the state of California, if you're informed, to get around this process. And the main way of doing so is through creating an estate plan, and more specifically a trust. And real quickly, before we jump into what a full estate plan is, I'll just talk about why you avoid probate with the trust. So you would create this trust document, and you'd essentially the Schingler family trust. My last name is Schingler, so that's an easy example. You actually transfer title to all of your assets into the name of this trust, which is kind of looked at as like a separate entity. So when you die, you don't own anything. Your trust owns everything, and the trust document itself talks about the disposition of your assets. So the state of California, therefore, doesn't have jurisdiction over your assets, and you avoid the probate process. And so that's the real short of it. It's much more complicated than that, but that's the real short of why you avoid probate.
It's a good, succinct explanation for sure.
Yeah. So.
Got it. We're talking with Jason Schingler. He's with Warden Williams. The website is wardenwilliams.com. That's the website, wardenwilliams.com. So you talked about probate avoidance, and you talked about putting the trust in place. You also talked about, well, you have on here, what other documents might we have? Yeah,
so when we talk about an estate plan, an estate planning attorney, there's usually 4 documents that are involved. There's ancillary documents, but there's 4 main documents. So you have your trust, you do have a will, and you have a power of attorney for finances, and something called an advanced healthcare directive, which is pretty self-explanatory. That's a document where you lay out your desires, and then you name someone to act out your wishes on your behalf, not necessarily impart their own decisions on their behalf. So, but the trust is the big one, and so we talked a little bit about that. That's where within the trust document itself, you name who you want to have your assets when you pass away. If you have assets titled in the name of the trust, that you name somebody who would be able to manage those on your behalf if you were to become incapacitated. So the trust is the big one. And a will is also very important in certain circumstances. And I had said earlier that if you have a will, you still have to probate this document to make it essentially effective. But for people with minor children, a will is where you name the guardian for those minor children. So for some people, it can be an incredibly important document, maybe more so than the other ones if you have little kids at home. So those those 4 documents comprise an estate plan.
Okay.
And if you're married, both people have a will, and both people have power of attorney for finances, and there's 2 advanced healthcare directives as well. So that is in essence what we would refer to as a full estate plan.
The full estate plan. And certainly you guys provide the full plan over there?
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
So yeah, so the process is involved with
Surprisingly enough.
Right.
The process is involved. The process of estate planning would be calling, making an appointment with somebody like Tomer or myself. You'd come in, we'd sit down and talk about your wishes. A good thing, if you were interested in this process, to have ready for that is a list of your assets and the fair market value of each. Not specific, just kind of what you have, because estate planning is largely driven by the assets that you own. And I think Tomer will touch more on that. But it's largely driven on your real estate, your investments, your cash holdings, if you have any foreign assets. That really drives everything. And then the other thing you'd want to think about is, what do you want to happen with your property when you pass away? And whether you have minor children. A big one that I'll touch on very briefly is what we would call ages and stages distributions. So sometimes if you have a minor child and you don't want them to inherit property at 18, I mean, some people just aren't mature enough to inherit a large sum of money at 18. So we do what are called ages and stages distributions. And so you would have, if you were to pass away before your child turned a certain age, you would have a person in place called a trustee. This is the manager and controller of the property that's held in trust. And that person would manage this money on for the benefit of your children. And then there would be certain principal distributions. So while it's in trust, they can use it for college tuition, to buy their first car, clothes, something like that. But the child can't demand a distribution. The trustee is the one who's really coming up with what they can. And then we'd have certain mandatory distributions. A very common scheme is a third at 25, a third at 30, and a third at 35. So that's why we call these ages and stages distributions. So those are certain things that you'd want to have a little general knowledge about before you came and sat down with us. And then it's Tomer and myself's job to really hash out these ideas and then put them into place. So.
We're talking with Jason Schingler. He is an estate planning attorney with Warden Williams. The website again is wardenwilliams.com.